Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says there are still two major unresolved issues in talks with the U.S. to end the war in his country. One is the future of the Donetsk region, and the other, the Russian-held Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. Zelenskyy said security guarantees for any peace agreement also remain a central issue in the negotiations.
We had conversation with the United States team about possible security guarantees for Ukraine, and we are working on a framework document, and it must be strong enough to truly work. We believe this document should be approved by the United States Congress. This would mean real, solid, legally binding security guarantees for our country.
Let's see where we stand and bring in our correspondents Nimisha Jaswal in Lviv and Sergei Satanovsky in Riga, from where DW has been following events in Russia since we were banned in the country. Sergei, let's start with you. Trump's peace plan was widely seen as echoing the Kremlin's demands. Now that it doesn't really seem to be going anywhere, where does that leave Putin?
Well, first of all, I should say that the Kremlin hasn't officially commented on the specific points of this latest proposal, this latest discussions mentioned by Zelenskyy. Putin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov basically said that there is nothing to respond to yet. Washington is discussing a peace plan with Ukraine at the moment and not with Russia. That's what he said. But at the same time, we're seeing Vladimir Putin stick to a hardline position on the Donbas. He recently repeated, for example, that the region is historically Russian land that became part of Ukraine by mistake, as he put it. And for that reason, he said Russia will take it by force if Ukrainian troops don't withdraw on their own. And beyond that, Putin is no longer talking about de facto recognition of Donbas as a Russian region. He now wants international recognition of Russian sovereignty over Crimea and the Donbas. So in other words, if the conflict escalates again later, Putin wants the world to see it not as Ukraine trying to reclaim its territory, but as an attack on Russia itself.
You mentioned the Donbass there, Nimisha. That is a huge issue as well for Volodymyr Zelenskyy. He takes issue with two aspects of this Trump plan that is on the table, that is Donetsk and the status of the Zaporizhzhia power plant. Why exactly is that?
Well, Nicole, the overarching question is, why is a country that has been attacked, why should that be the country that is making the concessions? As Sergei just mentioned, Putin and Russia want the entirety of the Donbass, and Ukraine still controls about 25% of the Donetsk region that falls within this region. Now, Zelenskyy has candidly shared a few more details of the U.S. peace plan. Last evening, he spoke to the media, and he said that the plan suggests that Ukraine withdraw from the area that it still controls, that the U.S. suggests it be made into a special economic zone, and that Russia is calling it a demilitarized zone. But many questions still stand, according to Zelenskyy. Who is going to control this area? Who is going to monitor this area? Will Russia pull back in equal amount, which seems to be a fair demand? And how will they prevent so-called civilians from infiltrating this area? And all of these are questions that Zelenskyy says have not been addressed. But it is interesting that he has left the door open. He hasn't completely shut this down and called it non-negotiable by saying that the people of Ukraine will decide through an election or a referendum. But once again, he's called for Western support and security guarantees to make sure that such an election or referendum can be carried out safely. It seems so far impossible to do that in a war zone.
Let's zoom in, Nimisha, for a second on the aspect of security guarantees. What exactly is Zelenskyy asking for, and from whom?
Well, when it comes to peacetime security guarantees, Zelenskyy wants hard bilateral agreements with the different allies. With the U.S., a bilateral agreement that is legally binding and approved by the Congress so that it's not subject to the whims of temperamental presidents. And with the EU as well, bilateral agreements, perhaps with the coalition of the willing. The EU has offered to send in troops. This is, of course, not agreeable to Russia. Of course, these are peacekeeping troops that have been suggested. Russia does not want this. Russia has countered once again with the suggestion of being a part of the security guarantees offered to Ukraine. It has also said that it won't attack EU or NATO countries. This, of course, is laughable to Ukraine and to the EU, because Russia has not particularly been known for keeping its word.
Sergei, none of that will sound appealing to Vladimir Putin. Where, if at all, would he be willing to compromise?
Well, that's true. There aren't actually many compromises he's willing to make. For example, the Kremlin has repeatedly said it wouldn't oppose Ukraine joining the European Union, but the only question here is whether Putin genuinely has no objection, or whether he is counting, for example, on Hungary to block Ukraine's accession. Russia also seems willing to discuss Western security guarantees, as Nimisha just mentioned, for Ukraine. It's still unclear, though, whether those guarantees could resemble, for example, NATO's Article 5. After all, preventing Ukraine from joining the alliance was one of the Moscow's key goals in this war against Ukraine. And one more point remains unresolved as well, whether Russia is ready to freeze the conflict in the Zaporizhia and Kherson regions, basically along the current front line. That idea was part of Trump's initial so-called 28-point peace plan, but later Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov basically repeated the demand that Ukrainian forces withdraw from those territories.
That was Sergei Satanovsky in Riga and Nimisha Jaswal in Lviv. Many thanks to both of you.